Right, good morning ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. We are just a couple of minutes late starting, so we'll crack on. Welcome to today's meeting. The meeting is being broadcast, webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. As is usual, can I remind members to switch the microphones on when speaking and don't forget to turn it off when you've finished. Minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January. I propose that these minutes are taken and signed as correct. Anyone got any issues on the minutes? Mr. Bill?
To raise this yet again, Chairman, but at this meeting I did ask for a copy of the plan which went to the December the 18th Cabinet and which came to this meeting and to E&T about the housing infrastructure bid and the impact this is going to have on southwest Leicestershire. I've now asked about 4 times. I really think that as a member of the County Council, if I ask for a plan, it really should
That's
be
from E&T, is it?
It came to this committee, I believe, but it's been to E&T as well.
Yeah, but it originated from E&T.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, can we take that up with the Director and Carruthers and get that plan? The plan does exist. You want a large-scale one so you can see it properly, is that right? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other issues on the minutes? Terry Richardson.
If I could just make a point about that plan. At the meeting, it was actually stated, which is the case, that the plan is incorrect, was an old plan, which is why it shouldn't have been included. You know, it would seem strange having a plan which we then push out into the public domain, which we know is incorrect. So, you know, if it's incorrect, it's incorrect. So should it actually go out there? I appreciate Mr. Bill having one, but from my point of view, because it impacts my residents as well, I wouldn't like an incorrect plan being circulated to start worrying people unnecessarily.
Chairman, people in Ashton and Flamville, for one, are worried, and if it's wrong...
What we want to see is the actual plan that's supporting the bid document. I think that's the important one. If the plan's been amended or changed or withdrawn, then we need to understand that. I remember there was some discussion about the status of that plan. So we'll get that clarity and we'll get a note sent round to members from the Director. Okay. Any other items on the minutes? Right, I'll approve those. Thank you very much. Question time, item 2. I've not received any questions, nor have I received any questions from members under item 3. There are no urgent items to take today. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. I will assume that all members that are members of district councils, because there are various references in the papers, wish to declare a non-prejudicial interest. Is that okay? Any other interests? No? Okay. Item 6, declaration of the party whip. Assume there aren't any. Not received any petitions under item 7, which takes us to item 8. Now, just want to be clear, there are quite a few papers to refer to here. So we've got the actual agenda, which went out with the meeting. Then there was a supplementary paper, headed Agenda Supplement, and that is essentially the minutes of the scrutiny committees, which we will come to later on this morning as a summary of any issues that you want to refer to. There is then also a paper circulated by Rosemary. I think it went out on Friday electronically and this morning. And basically that relates to the Corporate Resources Department, and there are some additional information in there that was mistakenly left out. So I just want to check that you've all got that. Okay. Right. So we will start with item 8, the medium-term financial strategy, context setting and overall, Director of Corporate Resources. We've got Chris Tambini, Declan Keenan, welcome to you this morning. We've got the Leader of the Council, Nick Rushton, Deputy Leader and Portfolio Holder for Finance and Resources, Byron Rhodes, welcome to you, and Chief Executive, John Sinnott. Right, gentlemen, who would like to sort of do an opening statement? Declan, okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So just going to give an introduction to the overall position, some of the corporate assumptions that are sort of contained within the main sort of cabinet report. I won't cover the departmental positions because obviously that's been picked up by other scrutinies and later on this agenda. So in brief, the position obviously remains challenging on several fronts. We've still got a high level of sort of savings with £30 million that have been identified for the main sort of council services. On top of that, we've got £20 million of primarily cost avoidance activities that we need to put in place. We're going to keep the high needs budget in balance. And we've also got another £20 million of savings that will need to be identified if we're going to fully close the financial gap over the 4-year period. Those spending requirements have been very much driven by sort of service growth pressures, which have identified £50 million over the 4-year period, but also pay and price inflation, which is significant, again, primarily driven by the national living wage of about £44 million over the 4-year period. But I think probably in some ways we've kind of got used to the sort of the spending and the cost pressures and the savings, but the biggest feature of this MTFS is probably uncertainty. We're now in the final year of a 4-year settlement, and we've got an unknown ability or future ability to increase council tax. We only sort of it's very much hand to mouth. You get 1 year at a time, and the economic environment is very, very uncertainty at the moment. We sort of seem to be pretty much over the sort of the economic kind of growth following the credit crunch, and now sort of global economies are sort of teetering a bit, and obviously that has a detrimental impact on local authorities as well. We've had we're also due next year the most fundamental sort of review of sort of local government finances in a generation between sort of fair funding. We've got the comprehensive spending review, but also sort of the business rate retention system. And the initial sort of indications of fair funding is that it does look positive for us at the moment. But the thing that I would sort of raise on that is kind of overall local government funding is key for this, and the more constrained that is, the more difficult sort of fair funding is going to be to have any sort of positive impact. And government is in a very tight position. They kind of, although they've declared the end of austerity, all it is just taking in truth a different form. They still are going to have to manage the finances and trying to balance the national picture. And it's worth bearing in mind as well, fair funding doesn't cover all of the funding that we receive. We know for certain we're going to lose £3 million of growth through the business rate baseline. The government's already confirmed that. There's numerous grants that we receive that we've had no indication post-1920 just because we're waiting for a comprehensive spending review. And I've touched on the Council Tax Alliance. We've had the ability to raise a higher amount due to the adult social care precept, but also because inflation's been higher. But this could quite easily drop back to the 2% referendum limit that we used to face. We just don't know at the moment in truth. But the funding uncertainty is only half the story. You know, cost pressures change, but they don't go away. A few years ago, it was very much adult social care was the focus. Then that moved very much into children's social care, and now our biggest sort of single pressure is SEND, and trying to manage that within the sort of the resources that we've got. So these pressures may subside and they may become more predictable, but in truth, they don't fully go away. We continue to have to face and deal with them and put a lot of effort into manage them. Similarly, pressures on organisations that we work with, they can have a potential to impact the county council. And probably the biggest single example of this is the significant money, I think it's in the region of £35 million that we receive through the Better Care Fund. But that's very much dependent on the Department of Health believing that it's the right place to put their resources rather than sort of using it elsewhere in the NHS. So uncertainty can kind of come at us from all sides. And we've tried to reflect that uncertainty in the key assumptions as we create the corporate, I suppose, the corporate envelope that sort of we work within the MTFS. We've continued to assume the sort of the total funding reductions that we've seen historically are going to continue for the sort of the next 4 years. We've assumed that the council is going to increase maximum council tax, but at the constrained 2% level following 1920. We've got the final year of the adult social care preset and the ability to do 3%, which was based on higher inflation, so a 4% increase overall. And we've continued to try and recognise service and cost pressures so we can plan ahead and we're prepared for what's coming down the road. And we've included an estimate for those items that haven't been identified yet based on what we've sort of seen historically, the sort of the known unknowns, as it were. And we've continued to identify and deliver savings, including sort of outline of future sort of savings under development that will kind of come into future MTFSs or potentially even into next year if they do get developed sufficiently. So the aim is to very much leave the revenue position set prudently, but not excessively so. And we've also got sort of similar pressures in some ways on the capital programme. It's grown now to its highest ever level. And this has been enabled by redirecting one-off revenue resources from basically into the capital programme. And it's allowed the county council to make the most of sort of spend to save initiatives, whether it's things like the corporate asset investment fund or investment in adult social care, but also take advantage of all the national funding that's around, particularly around infrastructure at the moment. And the capital position's tight at the moment. We've kind of got a bit of a shortfall, but we do believe it's manageable, but it does need as much attention as the revenue position. The cabinet report is going to go to that went to cabinet in December, is attached to the agenda. There have been some updates since then. For example, with the local government settlement came out after that. We've had more up-to-date council tax information from the district. So, but we will set out in the report that goes in February, sort of line by line, what the changes are since the last report. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I've got some questions. So when will we get the final settlement? Is that expected quite soon? Is that got to go back through Parliament? And they're quite busy at the moment with other things?
Yes, I believe they are busy, so it's either going to be this week or next week is what we understand, but it can even drift later into February than that, to be honest. So it is a bit of I think last year we were basically within the week of County Council before we received the settlement, but we are hopeful it'll be earlier this time.
So you'll continue with the process, and then if you have to adjust it, if there's any changes, we'll do that before full council. Okay. No, okay, thanks for clarifying that. Nick, did you want to make an opening statement on the council's financial? I will bring members in, but they just wanted to get opening statements.
Sure. Briefly, Chairman, as Declan's outlined, we've got spending pressures, we've got uncertainties, we've got doubts, we've got risks, and that's for the capital programme and the revenue programme. There's not really much more to add to what Declan said. I thought he did a pretty good job of walking you through it. And then apart from those, you're all aware of the SEND pressures and things like that. So I think it's best if we just answer questions, but bear in mind we are in a really, really tough position as usual. But in my view, more risks and uncertainties going forwards because there's so many things to be decided, and all we can do is make our best efforts to hope they benefit us.
Byron, anything to add?
I think what I would say is, although there are considerable risks and uncertainties, by and large we're in control. And not all councils can say that. And moreover, that we are projecting for the next 2 years, we should be able to break even on our revenue budget. The problem, of course, as Declan has emphasised, is the capital programme, which is very difficult to fund. A substantial amount of that has to come from revenue, and therefore if we're tight on revenue, automatically then we are tight on capital as well. And in the long run, that's going to be our major concern.
Thanks for that. I'm sure we'll come to capital specifically. John, did you want to add anything at this point? Okay. Right, so we'll work through issues in relation to the overall situation. David, Bill.
It is over when Declan speaks, because that has sort of brought us back to earth with a bump. I think that was such a serious statement that I would like to see a copy of that so I could take it away and go through it line by line, because there was so much in there that I think we all ought to absorb. I mean, it's quite clear that this claim that austerity is over, which we heard from somebody last year, is totally refuted by what we've heard this morning, and what is actually in the report, where it actually says that there's the report where we're talking about reflecting the continuity of austerity. Personally, I think that if the country wasn't in such a mess, people would be turning their attention to local government funding and the ability of us all to continue to supply public services. But unfortunately, nobody seems to be outside immediate local government seems to realise what is just how serious the situation is. So could I, through you, Chairman, could I ask whether we could be supplied with that report?
Well, look, this will be available to look at on the webcast. There will be, Rosemary will do the usual minutes, and then I think there will be a further report to the Cabinet in a couple of weeks. Will that go into a bit more detail on what you've presented this morning?
I mean, most of the bits were pulled out of sort of the December Cabinet report anyway. The Cabinet report in February will be a slightly summarised version of the December report. So the figures I quoted around the sort of savings and things like that, and the growth pressures are all in that sort of main report. But I'm quite happy to sort of share that sort of statement. It's just a summary of trying to summarise the key points.
Okay, if we could append that to the minutes, that would be useful. Okay. Terry Arnhem.
Thank you. I have to concur with Mr. Bill. Was an extremely important statement from Declan and very powerful. What I'm aware of, though, is that power is being heard here in Leicestershire. We might get as far as the Leicester Mercury. But what are we doing as a council to take this higher? It should be obvious with Northampton going down, but perhaps it's not so obvious when you have a council like this that has been kind of shaving away at its budget so effectively for so long that it's like boiling a frog, and that that perhaps the public aren't aware, and maybe even our MPs aren't aware of just what straitened circumstances we're in. And so what are the routes upwards to escalate the concerns that we have?
I'm going to put that to Nick and Byron, because I think that's in the context of the Fair Funding campaign, various statements that you've both made at full council in relation to meetings with MPs and with ministers. Byron, you've referred to meetings with the local government minister on a number of occasions, and we certainly heard him at the CCN conference. But the nub of it is we really don't know what is going to come out of the local government funding formula review, do we? No, we don't have any categoric. I was reading the other day some stuff in the local government press that the leaders of the cities, particularly in the north, are now getting together and saying, we don't like this, we think we're going to be the losers, and we're going to start a campaign to make sure government's aware that we don't lose out to the counties. So, and this was all predictable, that this would happen, that as soon as some block somewhere thought they were going to start losing money, they would start banging on the door of the Minister and the Treasury as well. So do you want to give an overall picture of where we are with that campaign?
Yes, I mean, these things are always discussed in considerable detail at meetings of the CCN Executive, CCN Council, and also discussed at equivalent bodies at the LGA as well. Of course, as you know, I'm a member of the Resources Board of the LGA, where they come up. It comes up. Inevitably, we find that, or I find that I sit there and feel, well, it's bad enough for us, but my goodness me, I'm glad I'm not in your shoes. When colleagues from other councils describe their situations, which are very, very difficult indeed in some cases. Regarding the fair funding, we do have some insight into what the formula is looking like. In fact, there's a debate going on the detail of that formula. And I was down in a meeting only a week or so ago where it was quite a considerable debate about the structure of the adult care funding, and that's continuing as well. So it's not yet decided is the answer to that. As far as the other councils go, most of the cities should come out of this in a fairly neutral way. There are one or two though who are well funded and some that are not. I mean, Birmingham, Leeds we have sympathy for, especially Leeds. Leeds, of course, has a large rural area within its boundaries as well. It's like a metropolitan district, and often you think of Leeds just being the city, but it's much different. It's very different to that. But Birmingham is a case in point, which is very low funded compared, say, with Newcastle. And might is right, they often say. Well, the leader of Newcastle, of course, is the leader of the Labour group on the LGA, so you can imagine that he's getting a little bit worried. But he does not looking after his colleagues in Birmingham, which perhaps he should be. But by and large, the problem doesn't lie with the cities. The problem lies in London, where, especially in inner London, some of the councils there are massively better funded than the cities, and indeed much better funded than the counties. And of course, this is what fair funding is there to address. And yes, they will put up a fight. I always expected they would be. I used to have quite long, lengthy discussions with Mr. Roberts when he was the Director of Resources, and before we even started the campaign, and we foresaw all this. The miracle of it is it's taken them so long to wake up because they didn't think that we'd get as far as we have. Well, it's on their doorstep now. What they didn't reckon with was a minister that actually being in post who actually understood the subject and is prepared to drive through the reforms, which now we have. We didn't have before, and never had before in my experience. So it's a bit of a fight that's going on at the moment, and we intend to win, as we've always said we shall.
Okay, thank you. Nick, did you want to add something?
Yeah, basically, I mean, we should really, as a county council, be taking some credit for the fair funding review. I know it's been a long time, and I know we've faced criticism from yourself and from the Labour Party, but we are getting somewhere, and a lot of it is down to the work that the county's done, in particular Byron and Chris Tambini. I'm not being rude to Declan, but Chris Tambini's mentioned to me by nearly all the upper tier leaders for the sterling work that he's done behind the scenes, and the work that is done by Tambini and his team, it feeds into the Rishi Sunak stuff. Rishi Sunak is a good, very bright, very clever minister, but he does like numbers, so he needs evidence and numbers, and we've been providing him with them. And if the fair funding review comes to fruition as we'd like it, based on what Rishi is proposing, where the funding is based on population, and then beneath it the blocks are built up by other matters, so you can take deprivation into account in some of the building blocks, it will benefit us, and the areas they'll look at to work up the formula will be based on districts. So you'll have the districts, they'll look at the districts and see what funding is required for each district, then put some stuff in for deprivation, but it will benefit us as a rural county in the long run, and we do need to be aware that there will be opposition to it from the ones that are going to be disadvantaged by it. But in my view, they want disadvantaging. I don't want to be rude to the Labour Party in particular, but when Brown and Blair were in charge, they distorted the whole system, which benefited their areas. Now what we've got to do is get back to a more fair system based on population, and the one that Rishi is proposing is the one, and we will need to be vocal in our support of it, because as you've seen in The Guardian today, lots of criticism from some of the northern cities who are going to lose out. Now they're going to do it, but we need to be vociferous in our support for it, and then once we get the new formula in, we then got to pressurise the government not to give it about 400 years of transition, otherwise we'll never get anything. You know, if the transition period is too long, we don't mind having some, so the ones that are going to lose out have a bit of time to get there, but we don't want it going on forever. That's all I've got to add.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back, Terry, because you've
Yes,
you're held
think,
responsible
I think
for some of the situation.
Yeah, well, we have criticisms of it, clearly, but I also like to point out that at the LGA conference, where Councillor Rhodes and I were sitting next to one another, and I was manifestly supportive of fair funding. I think there's some good principles behind this, and I think the work Chris Tambini's put in is well worth looking at. I think that the problem that we're getting is that, yes, if we're going to reduce funding elsewhere, this is the problem, is the cake is too small. Yes, we need to distribute the cake more evenly, but if the overall cake's too small, yes, of course, people are going to squeal. And I have every sympathy with Labour colleagues in northern cities who will be struggling. I have somewhat less sympathy with places like Westminster and Chelsea.
Right, okay. Terry Richardson.
It was really just on that point. I mean, my understanding, and hopefully Nick and Byron can support this, is that from everything I've read, that the government are finally moving towards funding local councils on a population basis, taking out rurality and taking out deprivation, because they've never been the right indicators. But I think there's also another aspect here that as at the last time figures were released, all councils are sitting on record general fund balances, 20.7 billion. Now, the reason they're sitting on 20.7 billion is not because they want to, it's because they've got no certainty of future funding and how the system is. So My argument has always been twofold. We need a new system, which I really support the work that we've done here as a county council to try and get fair funding put in place and to have it on a better model. But also, if we could release that 20.7 billion, because councils have certainty of funding over the next 5 or 10 years, that will benefit all of us. So where I disagree with Terry slightly is the cake is still enormous. It's just that because of lack of certainty, we're not releasing a large chunk of the cake. And 20.7 billion would go an awful long way out of general fund balances if that could be released. Because at the moment, because we don't know what's going to happen next year, we can't release as much as we'd like to, because if it doesn't change, we're stuffed, quite frankly, if that's a sensible discussion. So I'd also like the thought on, working with perhaps Richie on a longer term funding model to release those general fund balances, or to give councils the ability to do so.
Well, that's what CSR is supposed to do, isn't it? Comprehensive spending review. Byron.
Well, you'd think so. Effectively, Mr. Richardson's put forward, which is an interesting idea, is that all balances should be pooled. I don't think that is what is on the table at all. Some of these balances have been accumulated over many years, and you're quite right, they're very substantial. But they're substantial in certain councils, but not in others. It's very uneven distribution. You find, by and large, not always, very high levels of balances in many district councils, particularly those that have had high levels of development, as they've accumulated it through increases in business rates and also from the New Homes bonus money over the years. But you'll find at other district councils it's negligible, and they haven't got the money. You'll find that also true amongst some of the unitary authorities as well. And particularly in London, you will find they're very, very high balances there. How we? I mean, short of actually saying all balances over a certain percentage level must be sent to the centre for redistribution. I don't know how we put that right.
Okay. Yeah, go on then.
I wasn't suggesting pooling. What I was suggesting was that those councils that had historically high balances, if they could use them, you could then use that in the damping model for the first 2 or 3 years to even those out and even out funding. And thereafterwards, we would all have an appropriate level of reserves because we had certainty of forward funding. So I wasn't suggesting pooling or anything radical. What I was suggesting is freeing up cash that councils have to sit on because they've got no visibility of the future.
Right, okay. Well, Chris, you want to come back? I know what you're going to say. It's all accounted for, and you know how you're going to spend it all, and there isn't any spare because you've been saying that, or your predecessor has, for the last 10 years.
Well, I wasn't actually going to come back on that point, but I'm glad the message has got through anyway. I was going to come back on deprivation, actually, and what the government proposed in terms of the fair funding review. Is what they propose so far is what's something called a foundation formula. The foundation formula includes services such as waste, home to school transport, concessionary travel, and those kinds of services. And what they've said is they've done some analysis, and they said that deprivation isn't a key cost driver. They said it accounts for 4% of the cost for those services. But they've also said that deprivation will be a key cost driver for things like adult services and children's. Now, in terms of adults and children, that's about 60% of our costs. So they're the key ones. So they're not saying deprivation doesn't matter. They're just saying for those services, it has a low weighting, and they want population to be the key driver for that. And I think in the press it's got a little bit kind of lost. People just thinking it's all going to be on population. That's not going to be the case. Deprivation is still going to be a key factor, and it probably needs to be in terms of adults and children's.
We've covered that. Now, the council tax, you've been doing more work. I know you said you wanted to do more work with the districts on the base to maximise that income and also to be better at predicting it. So most years when we get to the Cabinet report, the collection funds have found a bit more money and you put in about another $1.5 million. Where are we on that? If the forecasting's better, that won't happen, will it?
So the In terms of the sort of the collection fund surplus for this year, it's much lower than it was in previous years. Talking at a sort of total county level, it hit about sort of 7 million being the kind of the overall surplus. That's dropped near to sort of 1 to 2 million sort of level. So that has dropped away. We are seeing a bit of a sort of a tailing off in growth. In the last few years, it's been running about 2% sort of across the county, and the latest estimates for districts has dropped away. And that's either dropped away because they've gone a bit prudent again on their estimation, or because underlying growth generally has dropped away. But we'll only get a read on that sort of probably sort of 6 months into the year. So last year was much better. It's visible that we can see that it was much better. But going forward, we're not so certain.
Okay, but you often, in previous years, you adjust the income between the original budget that comes out, the draft budget in December, and the report to the Cabinet in February. Do you have any idea whether that's going to be the case this year?
Yeah, it will be about 500,000 between the sort of the draft and the final.
Okay, that's helpful to know that. So that would be that's an improvement, is it, in terms of the accuracy?
Yes, it will, but it's what it's been offset by is the other factor I mentioned, the sort of the growth rate dropping down from 2% to 1.6, and that's a much bigger impact because that as an ongoing basis. So that one's probably about £1 million, whereas the sort of the short-term collection improvement's about £500,000. So, but it's just bear in mind it's £300 million, so these figures are kind of around the margins.
And I just want to ask you about and just get full understanding of in the current MTFS, partway through the year, you put extra money into highways for highways maintenance. From memory, it was about 5 million. Then the government came along and said you can have some extra money from the potholes fund or whatever, but you've got to spend it by 31st of March. So, talking to the director, the way that's been done is to make sure that it is spent. You've effectively brought forward schemes that were already in the pipeline and going to do that, and you've used the government's money, and that meant you didn't have to use the money that was coming forward that you made available from underspends. So my question is, what's going to happen to that 5 million that the council was putting into highways maintenance, which I understand now is, you effectively that's gone back into the central pot, and you would need to make a decision. Are you minded to put that in again, Nick? Because you'll be aware, representing a rural area, and it's not just rural areas now, it's urban areas as well. Notwithstanding the weather issue, which we know, but there is just more and more deterioration being seen on patching and potholes, and we need to do what we can to get a grip on it.
You're right there, and I'm, as you know, very keen on maintaining roads and highways because it's bread and butter issues for us all as county councillors. Chris will have to tell me where the money's gone. I understand what you said because it's true, but where's it actually gone back to?
I suppose the basic premise is we'd never have got it all spent this year in a sort of in a sensible way. So it basically just gets freed up then for sort of future capital programmes. So it's going to be a mixture of, obviously there's further highways infrastructure that we know is coming down the road to sort of invest in, but also it just helps with that overall funding of the capital programmes. We do try and just direct it to where the sort of the need is most. So it's basically built into the MTFS. If you see the sort of the capital programme, it's part of that overall funding for the position, but due to the pressures on highways, at some point, it's probably more to leaning towards that sort of longer-term infrastructure rather than short-term, just because they got the funding to meet those needs that they have at the moment.
The other problem with it was if you did think you wanted to spend 12 million on filling potholes, there isn't actually the capacity out there to get it done. So the ones that we're doing, I've got one, say in Normanton, as I mentioned to them in November. It's not going to be done until March. Now, it's not that they're not going to do it, they just haven't got capacity to get to them straight away. So if you did try and spend, say, the 5 million we put in plus the 5-ish around we got from the government, you wouldn't actually manage to spend it because you haven't got the men out there to do it. So I think what Declan suggested where it's gone is the prudent thing to do with it.
Okay, at least we've understood the position. Okay, so I just wanted to mention paragraph 29 because this one really does stand out, doesn't it? The revenue support grant. In 2015, we got 56 million. This year, nothing. Now, in this new formula, are we to understand that there will be no more revenue? I'm referring to page 8 of the Cabinet report on 18th of December. So the main report, near the top there's a table showing revenue support grant reduction. In 2015 we received 56 million. This year we will receive nothing. That is the end of revenue support grant. So are we to understand that that's it now, and that in the new formula funding for local authorities will largely be council tax, business rates and income that we receive by charging for services, and the odd grant?
The answer to that is yes, but, and the but is that the business rates themselves could gradually deteriorate in value, and there are two reasons for that. Next year, of course, we will be switching to the new formula. So the amount that councils get will be based on the spending assessment, which comes from the needs analysis work, which is part of this fair funding. But the balancing factor will be business rates. And I'll use the top-up and tariff system to redistribute the business rates around the country, which of course is what they currently do. So we're forecasting on that programme there, you see a forecast running, roughly speaking, at about £10 million a year fall in revenue support grant. With the revenue support grant having disappeared, we'll see that we are projecting at the moment, because we have no reason not to, that the business rate contribution to our finances will continue to deteriorate at the same rate.
And why is that? I mean, is that to do with the concern about businesses closing on high streets?
No, it's all to do with the way the money is distributed. I mean, there will be, in the longer run, with the present structure of business rates, I think that the value of the quantum there will fall as more and more businesses become online and don't attract the same amount of business rate liability, unless the system is reformed, which of course at the moment isn't on the table, but perhaps ought to be. No, the difficulty is this, is that you've got to look at it in the context of overall government spending. And at the moment they are projecting very, very large increases in spending on the health service, which everyone, or most people would say was absolutely the right thing to do. But that spending is out of proportion to the growth in national income. So if the money is sent to the health service, it implies there's continual pressure and reduction in budgets elsewhere, and that's how we've based our forecast.
We're not a protected service.
We're not a protected service.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Any other questions on the overall situation before we move on to the Chief Executive's department? Okay, thank you very much. So we're now going to the main agenda. Page 17, Medium-Term Financial Strategy, Joint Report of the Chief Executive and the Director of Corporate Resources. And this is specifically looking at the spend and programmes, revenue and capital in that department. And that comprises a number of services for which those senior officers are now joining us. Okay, we also have Mrs. Richardson here, who's Cabinet Lead on Communities, in case members have got any questions relating to that. So, who's going to present the overall situation? John?
Well, Chairman, if I may, because of the nature of the department, which, as you said, is about providing a range of support services, I can't really do a summary, so it might be most expeditious to move straight to questions.
Right, okay, so, as I say, we're starting on page 17, and that's looking at service transformation and background, and then over the page on page 18 is the revenue budget, and you'll see that that breaks down the various sections on table 2 of the spend. And then we've got the appendix that talks about, gives you a detailed breakdown.
Page 27.
Page 27. Anybody got any specific questions about this department, or any officers want to talk about? Okay, well let's just pick one out. Let's start on the hardship and crisis support service. Give us a bit of background on that. This committee's done quite a bit of work on poverty, and we had a meeting before Christmas with DWP that Terry and Rosie will recall, and the issues with universal credit and the problems that's causing people. As I understand it, this fund was set up as an way for people in emergencies to be able to access money. If universal credit failed them or it was delayed, they could just get this. Now, what you're saying here is that this growth is needed. You're going to provide a different type of service, but you need to put some growth in here to make sure it works. Is that a summary? Do you want to explain why you need this growth and what's the overall outcome? Is it going to be a better service as a result of this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's as described. At the moment, it's called the Signposting Community Support Service, which mainly is either through districts or the CAB or directly through our adults or children's departments. We receive requests for hardship funding. Typically, it's white goods, so it's to help people who are in crisis to get into accommodation. So often when you move into accommodation, whilst you can get the rent to move in, the flats or the houses aren't furnished. So this pays for things such as short-term fuel, getting gas, electricity in, white goods, used white goods and graded white goods at a reduced price. And it works through referrals from First Contact plus referrals from Charity Link and the Bridge Housing and the CAB. So that's broadly how it works. Historically, we got a grant to cover the full costs, in the early years of that, we didn't actually use up all the amount of money. So there was a small reserve built up. That's mainly due to predicting demand, because it's clearly demand-led. So there was a small amount of money left over, which we've been able to use to support the service over a period of time, the last couple of years. However, demand is beginning to rise, and the amount in that reserve is reducing. Obviously, you've already mentioned, Chair, it's down to universal credit. Delays in the benefit system, full stop, as well as relative levels of deprivation, short-term working, 0 hours contracts, things like this. So, and because of that, we need to put a little bit more into the service at the moment. However, in the long term, we'll be looking to balance the budget through recommissioning the service, working closely with the district colleagues, as well as I said, the voluntary sector and the CAB. So there's more of a holistic approach, and there probably is a smaller, and I would emphasise a very small amount of fat in the system where we can reduce the overall, perhaps through better signposting and a single referral point rather than multiple referrals.
You talked about commissioning. Do you manage this in-house, or do you have a firm? Does someone do the processing of the applications for us?
Sorry, Chair. There's a list of providers for us. So whilst we manage the overall contract, it's just running down the list. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different providers. Some are, for example, well known, such as the Bridge Housing Support Function. Some are the CAB again, both Charnwood and the county one, and some is within the council's own services, such as First Contact Plus. So it's a range of providers who work collectively. They meet quarterly, and one of my colleagues, he manages the overall contract in working with all the districts.
I think this is obviously very important that this money is put in as a growth item. I think there's general support for that. It seems to be the last resort if people can't access funds through DWP. Terry Einan.
Thank you, Chair. A related question is to then point on page 21, point 25. savings, where we're going to be saving or cutting £85,000, something to do with voluntary services. Can you flesh out how that fits together, and particularly fits together with just what we've been saying about growth in need?
Yes, they're different services. The services that funded through the last item are primarily frontline services. So they are direct advice provision or direct support to vulnerable people. What I'm referring to at paragraph 25 there is more the infrastructure organisation. So they're the one or sometimes twice removed from the front line. So valuable though they may be, there is opportunities where the council's not looked at its contracts for a number of years, and so there may be, from what we've seen, multiple agencies delivering the same thing, in which case there may be an opportunity to look at a single provider rather than multiple providers, or working again more closely with the districts to see how we can align up services. So we provide, for example, we fund Voluntary Action Leicestershire, but as do some of the districts. So there may be some opportunities there, so that we're funding one thing and the districts, for example, are funding other activities, or it may be that we need to change the emphasis. So, for example, at the moment there's a lot of the contracts based on improving the website. The website's now improved after several years, so we might be able to redirect that money into more operational activities. So there are a range of different organisations that we fund, so it'll be a question of applying a matrix to that, seeing what's the most valuable, consulting with clearly the portfolio holder and colleagues working out in the districts to see where, and also the providers themselves. So it's more looking at efficiencies, and I think in the overall value of the contract we can make efficiencies without a detrimental impact on the frontline services, but to emphasise it's different from the hardship service.
All right, Joe, thank you for that. Can we just ask about the growth in legal services? Because obviously if this is very important, that largely it's providing support to departments to deliver things. But what you're saying is at the moment we're using quite a bit of agency to meet the workload. So this would recruit more in-house posts, and we wouldn't use that. Does that provide better value then? The one that did I queried was highways and transport, because as members know there's been a significant cutback in that department. The savings total 40 million. And they're doing much less. So I'm just trying to understand why they are requiring more legal work, given that their budget is so significantly reduced.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Perhaps I can pick those points up. So on the first issue you raised in relation to agency, there's a combination of external legal spend. First of all, agency staff, which are more costly than in-house staff. And secondly, we're using external solicitors firm for which we pay an hourly rate. So clearly that's going to be considerably more expensive than managing an in-house resource. So the aim of the growth is to reduce that expenditure, certainly in the social care field where that's mainly arising, and to bring that back in-house where I think we deliver a better service as well. On the highway side, you might need to ask Mr. Cross to elaborate, but the gist of that is the big programmes that are coming through. So we're thinking about the Distributor Road, HS2, Lutterworth East, those very big projects which would require some additional resource to support. We'll probably look at that, perhaps some of that being fixed-term posts, to ensure that we manage the budget in the best way for the council. But I think that's probably the.
That's fine. I understand it's for capital and big, and you've made the point it may be time limited.
Yes, I think the other area that's under pressure is the legal support for Section 106 agreements, which obviously is a very significant aspect for the council in terms of income generation. And we're under pressure in the time that we take to turn those agreements around. So I think it's important that we boost that resource if we can.
Yeah, no point taken on that. Okay. Alan Pearce.
Sorry, just back to the other discussion regarding the crisis funding. There's national programmes, there's lottery funds available somewhere, but do we work with there's a group that I'm aware of, Help Through Crisis. Do we have anything to do with them? I think they get 33 million a year. Do we link with these external groups at all to help?
I'll have to look into that. I'm not familiar with that particular project. But again, if there is opportunities for collaborative working, then we clearly would explore any opportunities that are available.
Peter Bedford.
Just a few points, Mr. Chairman. Paragraph 19 on legal services, I think you covered the question that I was going to ask, but just for clarification, the extra 230,000, is that taking into account these savings by not using the external providers? So we'll still require this additional growth item?
Yes, these are additional full-time permanent staff on the establishment. It will have the knock-on effect of reducing the demand for agency staff, though.
Okay, and sorry. Second point was on paragraph 24. This is something that's come to corporate governance in the past, is around trading standards. So I don't want to go into Brexit in too much detail because we'll be here all day. But essentially, just concern around that, obviously the uncertainty there, we may need to look at that because we don't know how the situation is going to be. So just a comment on that.
I assume there's a risk, what do you call it, a risk plan for this. One question on the back of that, to add to that, is if you have to do a lot more work, can you claim this back from the government?
Currently, Chair, there's been no indications from central government that specifically trading standards or any regulatory services will receive any additional income. So you're quite right, it is currently on the risk register. We are monitoring the situation. We're making representations nationally through the National Trading Standards Service. And there's been some calculations there in terms of what the impact's likely to be. We're hoping as things progress, when there is a little bit more certainty, we'll start be able to discuss this centrally with government. There are a number of other agencies, for example, the Food Standards Agency, that we collaborate with, and they're also in a similar position. But the question is bang on, really. This really the discussion needs to start now. Hopefully in the next few weeks, we should have a little bit more steer in terms of what the expectation of central government is. If you've seen any news reports about a possible 35 million being distributed, that is in relation to the Port Health Authorities, which essentially is a district council function, and that relates to the environmental health services and not trading standards regulatory services in this context.
And further on that then, there's going to be a lot more regulations that will need to be made, assuming Brexit happens in any form, to put back into the system regulations that are currently covered by EU. That's going to affect you, presumably some of that will affect your work, that you're suddenly going to have to get up to speed with these.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, Chair. The situation as it is at the minute is that there's two parts really to trading standards. We're not just an enforcement agency. The demand on our services in this area will be particularly in relation to supporting businesses. We're expecting a plethora of changes, and trading standards are seen particularly with small, medium enterprise businesses, small Leicestershire businesses. We will need to be ready to provide that support. So we do expect a significant increase in demand on the service.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Nick.
Gary down in Trading Standards does an incredible job, really. It is a very small department, and when you look here, he actually says, therefore, there will be an impact on services. I will see if we can try and avoid that. There's so little left down there that we really need to protect what we've got. Because as he said at the previous scrutiny committee when I was here, you know, that the potential for work that is heading his way, we really need to save what we've got. And also, while we're here, be aware that after Brexit, we may well have to come back and deal with the problems which are going to be lumped on Gary and his team. Now, there's no doubt we can do it, but he will need more resources, I'd imagine, going forward, because there is nothing down there left to cut. So any cut, even 30,000, as he says here, will be an impact on frontline services.
I think we'd all be supportive if you could find a way of losing that between now and when it comes back to the cabinet. I'm sure you can find Byron can find 30. You heard there's a bit more coming in from the district council's collection fund, so you could allocate that. We'll leave it with you. Okay, thanks. Kevin.
Yeah, just a really very simple question, actually, which I just didn't understand in paragraph 25 on 21, and I've looked everywhere trying to find out what VCSE stands for. Presumably voluntary something, but just...
Sorry, Chair, voluntary community sector enterprises.
Bill Bolter.
Thank you. It's most been answered. I was going to ask the leader to put some assurance behind the reduction in trading standards, but he's already done that, so we can remind him of that if we need to. But I think Peter and myself both agreed that when it came to corporate governance that we were concerned about the reduction in trading standards.
Happy to confirm that I'm concerned about any reduction in Gary's department at all down there. As I said, any little cut does have a direct impact on frontline services because he's got nothing left that doesn't. So myself and Byron will sit down and seek to avoid that. And as I said to you, Simon, if Gary thinks we're going to get a whole lot more work through Brexit, we will have to deal with it and we will have to provide resources. People shouldn't worry about that. We are capable of stepping up to the plate if necessary.
Okay, we'll welcome that. Rosita.
Yes, thank you. On that, page 22, paragraph 30, we're talking about the impact of Brexit on local economies, and a survey is being commissioned by the lab. Now, do we know the outcome? Because I'm concerned that we all work in silos, and I think this is an issue to not only support Gary's department, if we could all work together in partnership, i.e., you know, if we know what we need, the district, the lab, you know, yourself, rather than working in silos. So what's your thought? When will we have the outcome of that? And, you know, what impact will that have? Thank you.
Who would like to answer that?
Chairman, in the last 10 days it's become clear that responses from government suggest they've woken up to the problems which Mrs Page identified. So until last week there were 3 or 4 different lines of inquiry coming from government on a regular basis, all asking the same thing of different people. So there is now a regional group which met with the Secretary of State for MHCLG last week to make that very point, and he got a very sympathetic response from him. So hopefully things will be simplified in the short term. They need to be. The one thing which is still not clarified is how government ask information which they need from the NHS, and how they ask for information from us, whether it overlaps with the NHS and the health and social care field. We can only continue to make the point that they need to be brought together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Alan, did you want to come back on something else?
Yeah, just 28, page 22. I just mentioned it in the briefing that regarding tourism, and we did centralise it a little bit, I think, but I think everybody's aware that there is a dramatic footfall drop in a lot of our market towns. Melton's one of them. I think Market Harbour is the same, and I just think there is a lot of pressure. So we need to really look at tourism and maybe look at how we do it differently. Obviously, the pressure is online. Some of the, I know we're trying to help with some of the business rates for the smaller entrepreneurial shops, but some of this is the lifeblood to some of our villages and small towns. So it's just be aware that we need to look at innovative ways to continue to market and support these towns and villages. Thank you.
Is that why the saving hasn't been made then? Is it a downturn in income that you expected?
Helen Moran, Finance. There was plans to have an organisation set up with the city that would become self-financing by 21-22, but further discussions since the saving went in have meant that that's unlikely to happen. There's other competition out there with Leicestershire Promotions who generate a lot of income, so it was thought that actually we still needed to carry on providing the base funding because we wouldn't be able to have income generation to make up the saving.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. But one of the problems we've got is that I think we did go into partnership with the city, if I remember, and of course the city attractions are quite different to what we offer in the countryside and in the towns, obviously, and what we don't want, no disrespect to the city, is that they actually do take more of the marketing budget, or they do more for themselves than they do for the districts and the towns. That's all, just to keep an eye on it, I guess.
There was some criticism of Leicestershire Promotions under the old contract as to whether it was being fairly right across the piece, and that led to what we've got now. But we did look at it in more detail. It may be that this is an area we should look at, have a report on, as to how it's all working, and take into account your comments about the impact on county towns, which was the major concern last time when this organisation was set up in-house.
There's lots of pressures. I think we've spent, Melton, as you're aware, spent a great deal of funding with the support of the county in regard to the cattle market, but footfall's down. Trends are changing. Trends of slaughtering animals, actually, or moving animals safely and securely and properly, and there's another term for it. So we just need to keep on top of that, because it really does affect our local economy and our economy here as well. So we I guess just being inventive and keeping an eye on things, because it's very important for the local community.
I think it would be reasonable to do a review and see how it's working, or we just take some advice when the appropriate time, when you feel it's settled down, to have a report on that. We'll come back to it. Sorry, John.
Paragraph 28 does make the point there's a report coming to Cabinet in February. So I think that same report could come to the Commission.
Thank you very much for that, pointing that out. Right, David Bill.
It has been mentioned already, and I'm grateful for the Chief Executive for giving a report on this, but Brexit. I think this is the first time we've seen an account of any measures being taken to safeguard the community if and when this happens. Is it possible to ask for a report on all the arrangements that are now in hand from county and district? Because I understand that inquiries in other parts of the country have led to the answer that there's a non-disclosure agreement. People are not being allowed to report what exactly they're doing. So I think that...
I think this was touched on at corporate governance, from what I've heard. John?
Jim, I think Gary can talk about the non-disclosure agreement difficulty, and I'll come back.
Yeah, my experience of the NDA agreement, certainly with central government, I sit on a steering group that's concerned with the airport, so any local authority that has an airport or port within its border. It's right to say that NDA agreements were in place for a number of these steering groups. That said, within the last 2 weeks, there's been a significant push to get those NDA agreements lifted to enable people like myself to be able to talk to other partners, both within your authority and outside. So I think you'll find, certainly this week, that information exchange will start to ease up. There are lots of discussions taking place now, and it's starting to gather some traction.
Chairman, I do find it astonishing that such a change to this country, this county, and our communities should be being considered at government level, and this information is not coming out to those of us who are going to be enjoying all the benefits of this wonderful new land that we're going to be living in. I find the whole thing about non-disclosure agreements astonishing. This is so serious, and this is going to monopolise all our activities for months, if not years. So, what right does the government have to say that we shouldn't be told what's going to happen? I would like to know what's going to happen in every aspect of our community, so people know exactly what they've signed up to when they decided that these sunny uplands that we're heading into is going to be available.
I imagine that is a question for each Secretary of State to decide. John?
Just to come back on reporting to members, it is a fast-moving situation. I think I would characterise what we've seen so far from the Centre as more about activity than action. But we had a Chief Officer meeting last week to think about how we can best provide information to members. And we'll do that probably through Members News in Brief, whatever it's called now, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to keep people in touch.
Did you want to add anything, Peter?
Just reiterating what John's just said, but also in corporate governance, we do track this as a key risk for the organisation. I mean, we discussed at our last meeting around a specific risk around agency staff that we use and potential fees that we would have to pay. So we do track this, but I think as John's just said, I mean, if we were to bamboozle you with all the possible outcomes and scenarios, it's just not constructive. But the organisation is on top of it, and we do have it as a key risk, so it is being managed.
Sorry, John.
Just to add one more thing, just in response to Mr. Bell, it isn't just about the local authorities sector, it's about the public sector. And there are other organisations as well, Highways England, for example, because one of the biggest risks after the 29th of March, if that is the key date, will be transport activity around East Midlands Airport. So most of the discussions around those issues are taking place within what's called the Local Resilience Forum, and that does bring together all the key partners under the chairmanship of the Chief Constable, and Tom Pennell, who isn't here today, is the Deputy Chairman of that group.
Okay, so you've learnt a bit more? Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions on the Chief Exec's budget? On Capital Programme 33, can I just ask about this broadband? So Phase 3 will hopefully get us to 97%. I mean, given that the ambition is for everyone to be able to access superfast broadband or some improvement, is there a plan for anyone who's not in the 97%? Yeah, 3%. I suspect they're pretty deep rural areas. Sorry, Byron, are you the lead for this?
The leader is, but I maybe I'll help him a little bit with this one.
Tom Pennell would be the expert on this, but he's unwell, so it's perhaps an unfair question, and it's one we could ask for a note on. But if you can help us at all,
He would, but I can give you an illustration of what they have. All right. There are small pockets left in some of the rural areas, and of course I represent a very rural area. And I have two villages in particular, well, three really, which are not yet covered. And these are really effectively just hamlets. And the programme, the Phase 2 programme is effectively completed now. So the Phase 3 programme, which is coming on and to develop, they're moving away from the fibre to the cabinet technology, which they've used to get to the level we're currently at, and moving directly for any future connections directly to fibre to the premises. So these particular hamlets, although they waited a long time, and the people live there have been very keen to get an improvement in service, actually, when they finally do get it, will get fibre to the home, or in their particular cases, which will give them a really super broadband connection, which they're actually quite pleased to look forward to, and that is what's now going to be rolled out sometime later this year.
But will that get us to 100%?
Well, now that's the question, because you'll always find a property somewhere isolated where they haven't got the connection. So I doubt whether 100% is actually ever attainable in reality.
Fair comment. Jonathan Morgan.
Thanks, Conrad. Thank you. Really, two-part question. One is about certainly what comes up from residents on a regular basis, actually how do we, having obviously through the county and also through districts, being able to actually fund the superfast rollout, or at least contribute towards it, is how we actually monitor what they're doing, particularly in individual communities. I've had one particular resident comment about the fact that consistently on a rolling basis, the deadline for superfast to actually be installed to their group of houses has been knocked back by BT every single time they miss the delivery date. They then roll back another 3 months for another one. So it's really how do we actually, what are we doing in the way of monitoring in return for the money that we're actually contributing? And the second point really, which is actually a 5G question, given the fact that within the time frame that we're talking about, 5G coverage will actually start to become quite embedded across the county. And given that from most reports, 5G effectively makes superfast redundant in all sorts of ways, is really just sort of getting a view for our investment, given the fact that it may well be by the time we've actually finished investing, we're actually investing in something that's actually been superseded completely.
The first one, and that is that in the contract requires them to deliver a percentage of properties. What it doesn't say is that you must do this village, that village, and then move on to there. That's entirely a commercial decision. So inevitably it means they do the easy ones first, and the longer ones or more technical ones take longer. But that is the answer, because I've asked that question myself. When it doesn't happen, when they've published a timetable, as long as they've met the overall percentage by certain points in the contract, there's not a lot we can do about it. Byron.
Yes, my microphone's working again now. I think that's absolutely true, which is one of the reasons these 3 villages I mentioned in my patch lost out. But we do, of course, have officers who are constantly looking at this, and I have relationships with them and keep me in touch with what's going on, and ask them also to tell me what they're doing, and they have contacts with BT OpenReach, who are the people who are putting most of this in. The government, of course, are keen to get other contractors out to do it now, and they haven't been very successful up to now, but they will do in due course. The second part of the question was 5G. Oh, 5G. Yeah, it's quite interesting when that comes. It's certainly being piloted in some parts of the world. Of course, it will have a very, very considerable effect on the countryside in a country like Britain, because of the very great increase in the number of aerials which will have to be put up to trade, because the cells are much smaller than for 4G. Be interested to see what the public reaction to that is.
All right, Jonathan. If you want more information on this, Tom Pennell is our kind of expert. He has a team, so we can get that for you, but it's probably best put to Tom when he comes back. Bill Bolter.
Thank you. Yes, page 39, item 28. Report properties outside the county. I always thought that...
Bill, I think you're on corporate resources, which we're coming to next.
Sorry.
Can you hold your horses?
Yeah, I'll hold my horses.
Is that right?
Yeah,
won't forget you. Anything else on the Chief Exec's department? We're all happy with that. Right, so The major outcome of that, Nick, is you're going to have a look at the savings in relation to trading standards. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all the officers that have contributed to this one. So we're now going to move on to the Corporate Resources Department. I'm just going to change the top table. Nick and Byron are still with us, as is the Chief Exec. We're joined by Chris Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources. Declan Keenan is back with us. And I'm sorry, the gentleman on my left, you're the business partner, are you, for the department?
Steve Robbins, business partner of Corporate Resources.
Okay, you new? No?
No.
No, we've not seen you before. Here, welcome to the Scrutiny Commission. Right, who would like to do an opening on the Corporate Resources Department budget?
Just very briefly, actually, if I talk to page 34, there's a table 8.
Sorry, Chris, before you look, this is the one where there is a supplement report because there was a little bit of information missing. It's the buff coloured one. Okay, just wanted to make sure members have got that.
I've got green, but not buff.
It's that one.
All right, you all got it? Right, sorry, yeah, Chris, carry on, please.
Yeah, just a very brief introduction. So the table in paragraph 8 gives a summary of the budget. And if you look at the bottom line, you can kind of see the budget goes from just under £33 million next year down to £28.7 million by year 4 of the MTFS. And that's despite some budget transfers have actually come into the department. The reason why there's been such a large drop is because of the savings. So there's about £6 million worth of savings within the proposals within this report, and not a lot of growth, under £1 million worth of growth. So it's a quite hefty kind of savings target and income generation target over the next 4 years.
Okay, and just because this department is a big, has a lot of income from traded services, just remind us what that, I mean, last year it was becoming very, very significant.
Paragraph 11 also kind of sets out the traded income, but you're right, there's about nearly £33 million worth of traded income comes into the department, and you can kind of see some of the aspects that are set out underneath there. A big chunk is around the kind of the commercial services kind of area, things like school food, etc. But yeah, it's a big element of the budget.
Yeah, and on that you've been quite successful, have you not, in school food outside of the county being bought by schools in other areas? I know that because you've been selling school food to schools in the city.
We have been quite successful in the city. It is a pretty competitive market, actually, where margins are pretty tight, but we have been quite successful in terms of the city, and we've also got some tenders in some neighbouring county areas as well.
Okay, so that's positive. Right, questions on the Corporate Resources Department. Bill Bolter.
Got it right this time, Chair? Right. Page 39, item 28. I'll throw through my little speech before, so I'll start all over again. I thought we're using the resources of this council to generate employment within the county. But apparently we're not doing that. We're going outside the county and buying property elsewhere. Can we give the reasons for that, first of all? And secondly, when we bought these properties outside, have they all the units been let now, or how long have they been empty and not let?
The corporate asset investment kind of fund is a big part of the income generation strategy for the authority, never mind the department. And within here, you can kind of see we had an original target of a £200 million investment. We now think that's going to go to 260 million. The vast majority of the current plans are around investing within the county. So they are building industrial units, be they Airfield Farm, in Market Harborough, more units in Colville, and also some proposals around kind of Lutterworth as well. At the same time, we have purchased a couple of properties outside the county, one in Nottingham, one in Lichfield, and we've just purchased a Citroen garage actually in the city. And they're really focused, because we've got a pretty decent rate of return, they're really focused on income generation, and that income is going to be used to support the services of the county council. What we don't do is buy properties that are a long way away from Leicestershire. So generally, the rule of thumb is they've got to be within sort of half an hour, an hour's drive of the county. And that just for practical reasons around kind of enabling you to manage those properties when you need to go and visit them. In terms of vacancies, I'd have to come back in terms of a bit more detail. I think the property in Nottingham is fully let. I think there's a little bit of vacancy still at the one in Lichfield, and when we bought it, there was a vacancy, but we're still being covered from the rent from the sellers of that property, so no financial impact in terms of the county council.
Just that, Chair, as we've been told this morning, is the possible recession on the way, and possible input of Brexit. It's been suggested that property prices will be falling quite substantially. Is it this present time a wise investment to go out? And because we could lose money rather than make money under the present circumstances. I understand why we need to do it, to try and generate income, but also remind you what the auditors had to say when I raised it at corporate governance. Is there some question about central government, about councils using their resources to buy properties to generate income? There's somewhat, well, not concerned by the auditors at the moment, but if it continued, they would have a concern about using our resources to buy industrial units and property.
We've taken a very prudent approach to our property investment. We've not borrowed any money at all to fund our property investment. There's no borrowing factored into our medium-term financial plan. I do get what you're hinting at. There are some authorities, I think Thurrock's, I think Spelthorne District Council in Surrey is the one that gets most of the headlines, where they've borrowed, I think it's £1.3 billion. And I suppose to put that into context, if we borrowed the same proportion of our revenue budget, we'd be borrowing, I don't know, £35 billion, which is, you know, we're not borrowing any money to fund our capital investment, and our corporate property investment is in the £260 million mark. So again, a far more prudent approach. So we've not got that problem. Is that if there was a catastrophe and we had a load of vacancies in our unit, we haven't borrowed, so we haven't got that thing where we've got to pay the loans and not get the rent income in. So I'm comfortable with the approach we've taken.
David, Bill.
I raised at the beginning of this meeting my concern about plans to develop between Aston Flamville, Burbage, Stony Stanton and Sapkett. And I was told that, well, a plan would be provided. I've now received by the magic of electronic communications that news from the E&T that the information shown in the plan is purely diagrammatic and does not necessarily represent proposals being put forward by the County Council. Now this, can I refer you now to page, well there's no pages marked, but the Corporate Asset Investment Fund, which...
To the paragraph then, David.
Paragraph 46, which talks about an extensive investment east of Lutterworth. Now, I'm sure the risks that Bill has referred to about the recession and the wisdom of this has been taken into account, and that's fair enough. But the point I'm trying to bring out here is that this east of Lutterworth plan is contained within the housing infrastructure bid, which was agreed by the Cabinet in December, the bid of which contained plans of the County Council's intentions, wishes, vision to develop vast areas of South Leicestershire, including east of Lutterworth, and the area, as I said, to the west which I've got an interest in. If these plans are only diagrammatic and of no consequence, I do wonder, have these plans actually been sent to the government as an indication of the county council's intentions? And is this east of Lutterworth plan part of it? So there's quite a bit of information there which I really want to see. All I'm asking for is details of what are the county council's ambitions to develop in South Leicestershire on plans that I can actually read. And I have to report that people are concerned in South Leicestershire. They want to know the facts. They are aware that this housing infrastructure bid has been put in, and this is further evidence that this is part of a general build-up of the wish to develop. Now, I understand the wish to develop, grow the economy and everything else, but I think local communities have the right to know what is going on around them.
Yeah, agree with you. Right, who wants to? Well, I think David's asking about the strategy, so I think there's a question for the administration there about, what is the purpose of all this? Yes, to grow the economy, but there will also, if it works, be substantial income to the county council through capital receipts. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. But the process is, as I understand it, there's a group of members that sit on some board or some other that oversee this. I think you mentioned this last year. So, but you don't have decision-making power. So decisions to progress these schemes has to go through the Cabinet. And indeed, this refers to a report going to the Cabinet. The Lutterworth East one refers to going to Cabinet next month. Yeah, no, March. So I think we're just after understanding a bit more about the transparency on these very large projects, because they're not without their risk, are they? I mean, if there was a downturn in the economy or a recession, particularly one relating to house building, and people were unable to afford to buy new houses for whatever reason, that would leave us in a very difficult position.
Well, it's interesting. Liberal Democrats always listen to the conspiracy theorists, don't they? What we've got here, in the case of the Lutterworth, is something which we've been quite open about. We've assembled together quite a large amount of land. We already owned quite a lot down there, and we've added to it by working with adjacent landowners, and we're putting forward a very big scheme, which is part of the Harborough District Council's local plan to develop a substantial amount of housing to the east of Lutterworth, and also there'll be some industrial commercial development as well. And that stands within our property portfolio proposals, and indeed in the end of it we'll get a substantial capital receipt at some point. And nothing wrong with that, and we've been working on this for some considerable time. The proposal that's been put forward near the A69, and that area down there, which is I think still, actually it's in Blaby, I think it is, but quite close to Hinkley Bosworth, is a private venture proposal, which we don't have any part of, except in our responsibilities as a county council. Because obviously if it requires infrastructure, we're involved with it, as indeed the district council will be. There is no hidden conspiracy here to do something and have massive development in the south of Leicester, other than what is contained within the existing local plans and is projected in the strategic growth plan, which has of course been approved by all the councils in Leicestershire.
Mr. Bill?
Private venture to the west of the M69, the rail freight depot, which is probably not going to have any railway at all, but the freight depot, that's a private venture, and we know where we stand with that. That's going to be imposed upon us by the Planning Inspectorate, and we all have our own views about that. No, I'm talking about the land to the east of the M69, which comprises mostly of the county farms owned by the county council. That area has also been submitted to the government, I believe, as part of the housing infrastructure bid, and that shows a total development not only of the area between Burbage, Stony Stanton and Sapcut, but also industrial development, it appears to me, coming all the way down to Aston Flamville. In other words, Junction 2 of the M69 is going to be totally covered with development if these proposals go through. Now, I know that's only an ambition, I know it's only a vision, but it was shown to us in December on a map which was no bigger than a postage stamp. And I've been trying to get hold of a map I can read simply to understand the ambition of the county council to develop it. Now, if that ambition is no longer there, then presumably we're going to withdraw that aspect of the infrastructure bid to the government, and everybody will be satisfied. But if we're demonstrating to the government that it is this county council's wish to develop that area, then that's surely we need to know the details of that.
I suspect the answer is it depends on whether Blaby progresses that and wishes to include a site in their next local plan. Is that a fair comment, Byron? We own land there. I mean, it's like Lutterworth. Lutterworth came forward because the district council needed to identify land, and they put this up as an option.
We own quite a lot of land around the county, and always have done. And as it becomes possible to develop it, we look to that possibility, and sometimes we're able to bring it forward. And that's one of the ways we fund our capital programme. But you're quite right, this would have to be done in conjunction with the, ultimately with the district council or the planning authority.
Right, Peter Bedford.
Thank you. Just a brief one on paragraph 35, which is the efficiencies and productivity programme. It's probably worth a comment from officers on that, given the significance of the savings, and it was projected to be 8 million by 22-23. So perhaps officers can comment on that and the robustness of that figure.
It is a big figure. It's the biggest save in the MTFS. What it's based upon, we've had a company in Eastern Europe coming in doing a kind of review of the target operating model for adults in terms of how they go about kind of running that department and providing the services. And they've come back in terms of the diagnostic they've done, saying they think we can make some significant savings around efficiencies. These aren't about service reductions, around efficiencies, around running the department in a slightly different way. So we're pretty confident that we will get to that £8 million. What we want to do is kind of roll that out in other departments. If you look at this service reviews that we've done over the last kind of 8 years or so, they have generally been focused on kind of big services, and I think there are some services that we could probably do some work around where we can get some more productivity savings out that probably haven't been reviewed for a few years. So we just want to take that model and kind of use it on other services. But there are risks around it, because you're right, it's the biggest saving in there. But we're pretty confident that we can actually achieve that over that time period.
All departments then?
The figure's based on the work done in adult social care, but it will cut across all departments, yeah.
That's interesting. Does that answer your question, Peter? Terry Owen?
Yes, I was looking at the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, 17, and I was kind of wanting some views on that. I get the impression that we are being suckered as possibly along with everyone else by Microsoft, who've got us where they want us. And then similar point to the one made by Councillor Morgan. Yes, we're going to update to Windows 10 in we have to by 2020, because Windows 7, which was actually one of the better versions of Microsoft, if one must have it, to the ever irritating Windows 10 with the ever irritating number of updates that we get. Is there going to be, what likelihood, I mean, I don't know what the rumour mill amongst the computer nerds is, about a possibly even worse version of Windows 12, superseding this by the time we get to that point?
In terms of the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, there's not a lot I can really add to in terms of what you said in terms of your question. Yeah, it is irritating. They have got us a bit over a barrel. There has been some work done with the LGA to try and kind of use those local governments kind of national kind of might, but I don't think that's going to be that successful, but we are a bit stuck with it really. And in terms of the technical thing about Windows 12, I'm not equipped to answer. Oh, all right, thank you, Ken.
Windows 10 is meant to be it with Microsoft, so it's meant to be an evolution of that product rather than a fundamental change like you saw from XP to 7 to 8 to 10. So that's why you get the big updates with it, but it should just be that, which in theory is easy for the IT teams to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Microsoft's forward plans are for improving their Windows system, but it's something we're always very cautious about in the county council. Commercial users tend to use Microsoft products, and we do, but those of us who have an independent streak of mind on these things know that it's very much better to use Apple, and therefore I would know rather more about what they do. They improve their operating system every year.
Google, Kevin.
Yes, not without problems. Are they the people that turn the speed down as it gets older?
They do some interesting things sometimes with some of their devices. Yes.
Right. Okay. I don't think we're going to get far on this. Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back on the non-conspiracy theory, which is being promoted heavily by people not in South Leicestershire, but in Hinckley and Bosworth, which puzzles me. But Hinckley and Bosworth. I live in South Leicestershire constituency, but you live in Hinckley and Bosworth. So, pardon me. But coming back to the point, to show how conspiratorial it is, in fact, the answer to the question raised is actually on page 54 of the documents we have. Because if you look under future developments at the bottom, it says Stony Stanton SDA subject to further detail and approved business case. So this council has not even started remotely looking at whether or not there should be a development there. Now, I think there's major confusion between what a HIF bid is and how it works. The problem is that HIF bids have to be put in long before any development might take place and might not even be approved, because if you don't put in for it and you do approve developments, you'll end up with no infrastructure. Now, residents don't thank us, so the point of the HIF bids is to open up access, not necessarily for buildings, but to actually make better the lives of the people. We've all been through Sharnford. We all know how bad Stony Stanton is. Those areas need infrastructure investment to actually protect them. The lorries going through Sharnford is appalling. Anything that anyone can do to assist in providing a bypass or something, we should consider for the benefit of the residents of the county. So there is no conspiracy theory here. As was actually said, a new local plan will be being produced by Blaby starting next year, and that will contain any areas for development as the local plan goes, which is something open to public consultation and debate. There seems to be a view being put forward by certain people that decisions are being made behind closed doors and that these things are going to happen. These things might never happen, they might happen, but at the end of the day, nothing happens until some developer puts forward a plan for consideration by a planning authority. So to show you how, and the map that we keep on going on about, the map for the Southern Gateway was something put forward in the early days of the Members Advisory Group as part of the SGP, on which we have members from all parties sitting. It was discounted from the MAG 18 months, 2 years ago, and was inadvertently put in a report as a demographic representation, which I fear members on this group are hanging their hat on saying, well, there's a plan, it will happen. no, there is no plan, it won't happen. There's no planning applications being submitted, and clearly county have got no desire to build anything at the moment because it says they haven't even looked at it because it's a future development sometime when. So I do get slightly concerned with conspiracy theories being promoted, and I just wonder if it's anything to do with the fact there might be elections in May. But
all right, Terry,
pardon me
well,
being cynical, but
that'll do.
Come on to the questions I wanted to raise. And on page 53, Appendix D, just really a question from myself. When it comes to Watermead Park and Snibston Country Park, which I fully understand where we're going, I just wondered what thoughts we might be given as a council to how they're looked at and managed in future going forward, because obviously whilst there is a capital expenditure and we sometimes need to do that, there will be ongoing revenue costs of these areas. And I just wondered if this is a core part of what county should be doing, if there are perhaps plans, as we have in other areas, to pass on to the district council or to a trust as with Bradgate Park. And I just wondered if we've had any thoughts on that. And the other question is on the agile working pilots. I just wonder what sort of timescale we're looking at for those and what the potential impact might be, if we have any initial thoughts on it, on how it will impact on the accommodation requirements of this council going forward.
Are you promoting a line that we shouldn't run country parks? Because we have some wonderful country parks.
Who?
The county council.
No, I'm not saying should. I just wonder what our strategy was. So I'm saying, have we got a strategy? What is our long-term strategy? And if we do have a long-term strategy, how do we ensure that the country parks we have are accessible to all areas of the county? So perhaps we might even need to consider buying further ones.
Okay. Who's going to take this?
In terms of country parks, I mean, the actual budget we spend on country parks is pretty small. It's just over 300,000, so it's not a huge kind of revenue cost. Just picking up on that point about kind of strategy in terms of other country parks. Where you look at where the location of our country parks are, they're kind of a band across the middle of Leicestershire. So I'm pretty certain there aren't any in Melton and there aren't any in Lutterworth. I think that's the case. But there aren't any plans to kind of open any in those areas, might I add.
South Leicestershire.
South Leicestershire. So, yeah, there isn't, and also there aren't any proposals in terms of, I don't know, transferring them to Bradgate or other trusts. They're pretty much kind of running them as they are. That's the current plan. The second part of the question was about agile working. We're pretty early in terms of those pilots, so it's something I'll have to report back at a later stage.
Right. Are we done? David, you can come back.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. One last time. I'm grateful to Terry Richardson for pointing out that on page 54, Stony Stanton SDA is still in the programme. That confirms, that confirms what I've understood to be the position all along. The point I'm trying to make is that on December the 18th, the Cabinet approved a bid to go to government which included a plan showing housing and industrial development, not only in the suggested Stony Stanton SDA, but over a widespread part of the county around junction 2 of the M69. Now, as far as I'm aware, that bid has gone to the government and is now under their consideration. Even if it was just indicative, diagrammatic, schematic, a vision, whatever you want to call it, it coloured the land between Aston, Flamville, in that area, to a considerable degree, and showed total development all the way, Aston Burbage, Aston Flamville, Stony Stanton and Sapkett. All I'm asking for, can we please be shown that plan, because it's been drawn up by somebody, or some panel, some group, some consultancy, here in County Hall. Somebody has worked on that plan, and I would like to just speak to this person so that I know exactly what this person has in mind with this plan. You can't just say a plan has been produced and now we'll forget it. If the plan exists, I'm asking, as a long-standing member of this county council, in fact the longest-standing member of the county council, to actually see the plan so that I can see it properly for myself and work out exactly what the ambitions are from some body, some panel, some cabinet, some officer, what these ambitions are for the part of the county I live in, so I can have a say in the matter. All I'm asking for, can I please be shown the plan?
Okay, point taken. Right, Mr. Bill, the document, if I recall right, approved by the Cabinet, the final details are signed off by the Director in consultation with the lead member, presumably Mr. Payne, and then it's been submitted to government. Do we know if it's gone yet? Can we then clarify with a note? Has it gone? When's it got to go? There's a cut-off date. Oh, doesn't go till the end of March. So it's probably still being worked on.
As far as I'm with Terry on this. It was included in error because it was eliminated. And my recollection is the same as Terry's. It was eliminated by the MAG years ago. It was produced by God knows who, and it appeared in those cabinet papers in error. As you say, David, it was only a postage stamp, and everybody there said they didn't want it in, so it isn't in as far as I'm aware.
Is there a revised plan to go? There must be a plan that goes with the bid.
I don't think there is. I'm again with Terry on this. I think it's like an aspirational type of stuff. So you bid for the future, just because if development did come there, that sort of area of the county would need substantial infrastructure to support it. So I think Terry's exactly right. It's aspirational stuff. So if you do get it, there is some infrastructure. But I don't know what plan you're on about. I can remember seeing that little postage type plan, but I was told it was in there in error and wouldn't appear again.
David, there was a comment at the Cabinet by the officers that was in error and it was being withdrawn and removed from the document. That was stated at the meeting. So what we need to clarify is whether anything else is being submitted, but I don't think we'll know that until March when the final document is worked up.
To have an input into whoever is drawing up these plans.
There will be a further report. It said that if the bid's successful, it's got to come back.
What I resent is that these plans are being drawn up in detail, and it's given to they're always given to us as a fait accompli. As members, we should be in at the start of the process, so we have a say in the matter, not at the end when it's all wrapped up and we no longer are entitled to have a say. And what's more important, the communities we represent are no longer entitled to have a say.
Okay, I'll ask the Chief Executive to comment, give him the final word.
Chairman, I'm not sure what Rosemary was whispering to you, but the bid has to be in by the 1st of March. So if I could just read a relevant bit from the Cabinet decision in December. It authorised the Director in consultation with lead members to undertake all further work necessary to prepare the HAF business cases and to complete the final bids ready for submission. And it noted that bids relating to the southern section of the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road and the southwest Leicestershire growth area had to be in by the deadline of the 1st of March. So that's all we've got, but what I would emphasise is there is authority for the chief officers to work up the bids on the basis of that Cabinet decision. And as you've said, the report would come back to the Cabinet if the bids were successful.
So that's where we are. And if it's successful, then we'll want to see it to scrutiny as well. Okay, anything else on the corporate resources? Are we all happy with that? Oh, sorry, Terry, I nearly missed you. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, only a very small one. Back on 44. Very pleased to see that the money to redevelop Snibston Country Park hasn't disappeared. Nice to see. And looking at the way that we're working with Leicester City Council and coming back to Councillor Richardson's point about councils that have reserves to spend, North West Leicestershire District Council are spending some of their savings on an excellent leisure facility in the area, which there is the potential to join up all the parks in that area. One could have a cycle and way with walkway and historic trail all the way from Whitwick Historical Society up to Colville Football Ground, taking in the industrial heritage of the Nature Alive site, and through Snibston, which could make this a much more attractive proposition. And obviously there's concerns here that costs may increase as the scheme progresses. What I would like to see is a scheme that progresses so that we attract enough punters so that Leicestershire Traded Standards can actually make some money on the coffee house and the car park. So I do hope that we can work together on this one across district and county.
Well, for those that don't know the route, I happen to know the route that Terry's on about. It would be a really, really good route to develop. But I can't say whether or not we've got any money for it, but the principle of that route is sound.
Just to confirm, we would be happy to see what we can do with the district council, but I'd have to make clear, in light of our experience with the design of Marlborough Square, there would be no chance of us entering into conversations with them about the design of a route.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so I'm going to thank the officers for attending. We're just going to go on and look at what the committees have said. Are you staying with us, Byron? Got a question about the collections hub, if you don't mind, but we'll get to that in a minute. But thank you very much. So we're now just going to the supplementary report, which was handed round. No, sorry, that was sent to you last week, and it deals with the overview and scrutiny committees, and you've got their minutes or notes of their minute extract of their discussion. So if there's any further issues members wish to raise in terms of reference to the cabinet, anything else you want looked at, or anything additional information before the budget's firmed up for council in February, now's the time to raise it. So just working through that. Health and overview. Anything to add, Kevin?
I think really to underline rather than perhaps extra, and that's the fact that there's still many assumptions in the health budget of grants that will be coming. Just a concern that clearly at the moment, as it actually says on page 4, little 3, assumptions being made subsequently as the M2FS public health specific grant would remain at the same level. And obviously there are rumours that maybe the NHS will snaffle some of it. So we did make quite a big comment about that.
A very valid point. We don't want the NHS getting their fingers on public health. I understand there is a cabinet report coming to cabinet, but it was when I was at the LGA exec the other day, there was a lot of talk about the threat to public health from the NHS, and if they get their fingers on it, they'll completely wreck it. I mean, they've taken all the money off us anyway. God knows what they're doing, but I think local government should be proud of what it's done with public health, and for the blooming NHS to even think they're going to get it, it will be a disaster. Now they're talking about a review, whereas before it was more of a takeover, but we do need to be well on top of this.
Is this where the money comes from, or is it how the service is delivered? In other words, the service might go back to the NHS. John, can you help us?
It's a bit of both, in my view. There are people within the NHS England who never wanted local government to get back public health funding and responsibilities in the first place. And they've had some influence on the NHS 10-year plan. The report the leader referred to will be coming to the Cabinet in February. It'll be our comments on that 10-year plan, issues of interest, issues of concern, and really trying to set out some ground rules about how we engage with the NHS locally to respond to it. It's a 10-year plan, locally, the system, and if you read the 10-year plan, that means the health system, not the health and care system, has to produce its own 5-year plan in response. So one of the things which concerns me, I've already discussed it with the leader and deputy leader, is the 10-year plan suggests the NHS will get into financial balance next year and then in the longer term. I think that's fantasy. And I can't see how we could sign up to any sort of joint signing off of a plan on that basis. So this report coming through to the Cabinet, no doubt it'll come to scrutiny as well, is I think quite significant.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Nobody else on health? No? Oh, sorry, Alan.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think we've got to be very careful. I think one of the issues, both some of the committees I sit on and some of the groups that I've been involved with, that some of the communication with the CCGs is not conductive to making good decisions. So I do feel we need to tread carefully, and I am a little bit concerned about potential of taking over some of the services that are run very well from here, and the public health of some of the services we've done there have been excellent, and we can't afford to lose that. And I do feel we have issues about cost of mental health still. They haven't really sorted that out. There's still issues that need to be funded at Bradgate, who only a couple of weeks ago had national press on its problems. So they're still not resolved, and we're still asking those questions, and that'll take funds to sort it out, I think.
Bill.
Yeah, very briefly, Chair, I'm concerned about item 5 on page 4, homelessness prevention. Reducing the workers in the districts. The only thing left now is the centre is at Loughborough, which is no good to homeless people in my area, just concentrated in the north of the county. And I think Blackburn also suffers as well. The homeless also suffer because they can't get there. It's I watch with interest what's going to happen on that one. It does concern me. We're attacking the most vulnerable in our society that I think we need to look after them, not disadvantage them.
Okay, your comments are noted. Anything else on health? Okay, page 7, environment and transport. So the controversial one there being implemented is obviously the bus service revised passenger transport policy being rolled out. David?
Just a quick one, Chairman. As you can see, at ENT, I did ask that the impact on bus services be treated as a priority. I think it's being proposed that £400,000 be cut from the service. If there's any chance that there's any money being put in, either through the collections surplus, which it's at least 500,000. I very much hope it will be more than that. If there's any chance of any cash being put in back into the system, could I make a plea that that's treated as a priority? You know, these services are the lifeline, as we all know, of isolated communities, and I think if we can just maintain what we've got left, it's going to be appreciated.
Any likelihood of having another look at public transport supported bus services?
I don't think so. I mean, what we're talking about for the collections surplus, of course, is one-off, and this is ongoing, and it's a fairly substantial service. So we do have to make some further reforms, and I think now we just have to get on with the job.
Right, Alan Pearson.
Yeah, a couple of points. We've discussed the transport at length, and I do agree we've got to be very careful of isolation and looking at the services, but we still have to be honest with ourselves, and we've talked about it at length, that it's not viable to run bus services having one passenger per service as such, or it's just bonkers. That's not using money right. We have to educate. Where we've used demand response transport, people really appreciate it, and it works. We have to be innovative, we have to be clever, but we can't be running bus services for one person a journey. That doesn't make sense anywhere in the world, Leicester as well. So we have to be very careful. The other issue is, of course, the SEN, which is very important. So it's important that we the inclusive nature of how we try and work with people with disabilities is crucial. But we also need to be very clear on some of the statement and how statements are made in some of the schools, because I believe that needs to be reviewed, because we're being left out sometimes or put in a situation where we can't really influence that. And I believe we need to keep an eye on that, because the most vulnerable deserve it, and we all agree with that. But I do feel sometimes, from my experience of working in schools and working in special schools, some people are getting very good services that actually could manage on different services. And I think we have to be very careful. Too often people are getting statements and they shouldn't. Now, we're in a situation, and let's be honest, in the Melton era we've got schools that are academies now. They're quite happy to offload children that aren't going to give them the scores, and we cop it. And we've got to be strong on this, because what it is doing is making it very difficult for this council that really provides a great service in transport to these people with disability, and it's making it very difficult for us. So we have to be very tough on the ones that can manage. And that's what we should be doing, because people that can manage, that means they integrate, they learn. And for people with disabilities to travel on public transport is a learning process, an educational process, and it gives them independence. We should be doing this at all and keep an eye on it at all times. So the vulnerable need it, definitely.
Right, you've raised quite a wide issue there. Nick?
Alan's entirely right. There was long discussions at the LGA exec about it, so-called offloading, where the schools encourage the pupils that are either slightly difficult or slightly disadvantaged to apply to be statemented, for want of a better word. And where then they come along, the appeals process, which we don't go to very often to try and stop them being statemented, because we lose so many of the cases. So the people that sit on the appeals process generally pass them to be statemented. Then we end up with the costs of transporting them around, which really we should send the bill back to the Department for Education. So the schools offload them to be statemented, therefore we have to look after them, and then the Education Department doesn't give us any money for it. Now Rishi is well aware of that, but the problem has been in the past is that the DFE out-trump MHCLG. And that is where the costs are. But people are very, very aware of it. And Rishi in particular, because he represents a constituency where this happens a lot, is very aware of it. But whether or not they'll do something about it, I don't know. I mean, hopefully, say when they do the local government funding review, even if there's no more money in the system for local government, they should be able to say to us, we can rebill DFE, we can rebuild the Ministry of Justice for some of the work which we're doing and they're not paying for. So that would be another idea to get more money into our bit of the system, if we could rebuild the ones where we're doing it. But the principle is entirely right. Schools shouldn't be offloading them. It is actually bad for the children to be offloaded. They're better off amongst their peers with help and care, rather than being offloaded and end up in special schools which we're having to build because of the offloading. I don't know what we can do about it, but Alan is absolutely 100% right on that.
There is a review of special needs, the statutory guidance on SEN transport, announced about 18 months ago. I suspect it's got bogged down because of all Brexit and so on and so forth. But I do remember that being announced, that it was going to take place. I forget under which Secretary of State, but that is due to happen, and it's not emerged yet. That may address the issue. But the problem is that anything over £6,000 is picked up by the authority. Anything below 6,000 is picked up by the school. So of course the school want to get it over that trigger, because then it gets transferred to the high needs block. Well, you try telling that to the parent that's trying to get the best. That's the difficulty for their children. It's very difficult. It's the system that's wrong. Sorry, Alan, you wanted to come back?
No, you're right. If there's a system, then we need to look at the system. Now, I won't dwell on it, but there is enough research programs where this has been an issue in other parts of the world, I believe. The issue is what are we trying to achieve for these people with disabilities? Where it's been strong and they've been integrated and used local services and bus services where they can, the impact is they go on to most probably get jobs potentially, or integrate into colleges, instead of having, let's all admit it, if it's going to be put on a plate for you, parents will take that. But again, it takes away from the more severe people with disabilities that do deserve it and do need our support. So I know it's a long-term thing, but we need to be very clever on this, or careful, and really encourage services where we integrate them and get them out there, because far too often it's easy to have womb to the tomb service, pick them up at home, take them off, they're out my hands, and the schools offload them and they travel miles. I mean, have you seen some of the mileage these people travel? It's bonkers.
Okay, Kevin Felton.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine's the bottom of page 9 under the capital programme, the second paragraph down there. Really, it's just whether there's been any update on the situation with the average speed cameras and whether we can keep hold of the fines in order to pay for further.
You're going to see the Minister, aren't you, Nick?
We're trying all the time. I mean, I've had letters back from Jenrick which weren't particularly helpful. I think he misunderstood what we're asked for. I had a meeting with Sir Alan in Melton Mowbray on Friday where we explained it to him, and he type of missed the point, so we're now writing to him. We've got Neil O'Brien, who actually got the point but can't do anything. It is a long-term, ongoing battle to persuade them of the benefits of letting us have, and all we want is the $500,000 rolling money. We don't want to keep, we've never said we want to keep the fines going forward and use it as an income stream, but where we've got them in, people have seen them, and we're getting more want them. Now, I represent a bunch of villages like you do, and they keep saying, well, why can't we have one? We've got as much speeding traffic, and I have to go all through the hoop of explaining why we can't roll the money. Because in Measham, for instance, they've caught like 1,500. Now, if we're not saying we want to keep that amount of fine, but to explain to people why we can't afford another $500,000 is difficult, and we're still trying to explain to every minister we ever see what we want to do, but it's the dead hand of the Treasury that is the problem with it, not, I don't think, the Transport Department.
Yeah, I mean, you've set something going, which is obviously there's a demand for. We appreciate that, but I think we said at the time that we should have tried to get the government on board for what we were trying to do at the start. And now we're in a difficult situation if they continue to refuse. As I understand it, the difficulty they've got is if they do it for us, they'll have to do it for everyone.
And I would say to them, so what? Do it. People are only asking for the capital back. We're not asking for 20 billion a year for the NHS. We want to roll our $500,000. Now, if they say we're only going to roll it over 5 years or 4 years, I'd say, great, we'll take it. It's the dead hand of the Treasury and in all honesty, a lack of understanding of what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, Terry Arnon.
I think a lot of the points were made about SEN transport. I think the only point I would want to add to that is that in that section, it's not parents and service users that really are the nub of the problem. It's schools who allow children to become so difficult that they then fit the high needs block and then get excluded and so on. So I think I would want us to say that it's the complex needs are being presented by the schools rather than just the service users.
That's quite a controversial. There will be people that will push back on that in schools. Excuse me.
Well, I would make a point of personal experience and also experience as a GP of many parents coming to me in tears about their children and the difficulty of getting anywhere until the child has got an education, health and care plan. Nothing seems to get done, and so I'm prepared to be controversial on that issue.
There are those if you're a governor that know cases where a child can be extremely disruptive in the class to the point where the rest of the parents are complaining that the class can't progress because of one or two individuals, and that leads to significant pressure to remove them. There's no easy answers.
Having been the mother of such a child myself, then I have some sympathy with that. But children are born with difficulties, and if we have sausage machines at schools who are only interested in getting their boxes ticked, then we are going to end up with this kind of problem.
Right, Alan, you wanted to come back, then we'll move on.
Yeah, just I don't want to enter into that because that's an interesting debate. What the debate should focus on is the individual personal programmes, or whatever we change the name to, is that certain parents want high statements because they get more money. and if you try and change it, there is statements that need to be looked at. And I have seen it worked in schools where we challenge some of the statements. As we said earlier on, they're not challenged. And then, you know, that in a certain way doesn't help the child to get integrated and moving forward, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to say, from an expert of years working with people with disabilities and in schools, you know, we need to encourage independence. We need to encourage, and sometimes, you know, not integrating them and not getting them into the services doesn't help. Does that make sense? I mean,
Okay, well, briefly then, because we're not going to sort this out this morning.
I think there's more agreement between us than disagreement on this issue, but I think most parents aren't interested in the money. What they're interested is having a child who remains in school, who isn't excluded, isn't being bullied, and is actually learning. And if we're getting those outcomes and they're not being moved on and out, we will get the outcomes we want on SEN transport. So I think we're all working in the same direction.
Okay, right, let's move on to adults and communities then. So, my question was really about this significant capital investment coming forward on the collections hub. Where are we on that? Because that is such a big item. But what I'm hearing is that we're reaching the point where we've got to put some investment into the records office. We can't not do that. So the issue is if the whole thing's not affordable, we might just have to do the records office, but that would be a shame if it wasn't all brought together under one roof.
Well, it's being worked on. Is the straight answer, and no conclusion was reached yet. But I mean, the one proposal, one end of the spectrum is 35-40 million. The cost of putting in a fully integrated, impressive building. There's a lesser proposal reusing a building already on the site. At the other extreme, there is the possibility of putting in a small extension on the current facility to tide us over for a few years. And then perhaps somewhere in the middle there may be another option. So we will have to bring it forward. The problem is there's no funding for anything, because all of it is contained within the future developments. And currently at 69 million, well, 40 million of it nearly enough would be the extreme option, as it were. But even if you take that out and did nothing, we still have problems funding the remaining items in the future development capital programme. And of course, so anything we do put in is a problem for us. But so we'll look at it. If something has to be done, it has to be done. But then that will have an impact on other things that we perhaps ought to be investing in as well, and we've got to weigh up the priorities. And the big problem, as I said right at the very start of this meeting, is that we don't have enough money for our capital programme.
When are you going to make a decision on that then?
Not yet.
I gather that, but could you be a bit more? Is this something for the medium? Is this an issue that's got to be resolved within the life of this medium-term financial strategy?
I haven't seen a paper which says we're in imminent need of risk of the collapse of the service if we don't do something today, as it were. So clearly there is a time frame for this. I agree it can't go on forever, but we've got to look at all the possible options, including how we finance it.
Anybody? Oh, sorry, Terry, you wanted to make a comment.
Thanks, Chairman. As Chairman of the committee, I'll comment on the hub first, which I wasn't going to, but it is something the committees have had several reports on in my time on the committee and as chair of it, and it's something we're very interested in, seeing if we can actually put some thought process as a Scrutiny Commission into how we might look at this, to see if there's some thoughts that we can come up with perhaps haven't occurred. We understand there are some further options being worked on, which is why we've asked for a further report to come back to the Scrutiny Committee. And we're also quite interested to see if perhaps with judicious disposal of assets there might be scope there for perhaps covering the insurance costs, for instance, just to give you some blue sky thinking of which stop people renting the pieces, and therefore if we can get more out in the community, we need a smaller storage facility, but schools and that can't afford the insurance for getting it there. But it may be that some funding from disposals invested over a period might be able to do it. But we have no thoughts, but the committee are keen to offer whatever help it can give to the cabinet in looking at all options. But it is something that we are committed to helping get out into the public and protect and preserve, because people are giving it to us. It is the history of Leicestershire. Coming back onto the points I'd like to make is point 12, savings under development, the target operating model. It's always difficult in minutes about finances to actually give a flavour, but the committee are very excited about this because whilst there is potentially a financial saving here, that isn't the whole story. And I know we're here to talk about pennies, but I don't think we should lose sight of what's underneath it. This will actually give more face-to-face time of our officers with our customers, as well as saving money. And that can only be a good thing, both in terms of finance, but in terms of the services those people are delivering. So I think the committee applauded the initiative. We're going to get regular updates on it. It's something we will continue to look at. And on a slightly more negative note, under paragraph 14, the committee asked the question, of course, what is going to replace the Better Care Fund? And I think it just illustrates the problems that we have as planning as a county council, that it's due to end the Better Care Fund in 2020, and nobody has the foggiest what is going to replace it. Now, we confidently believe something will come to replace it, but what the amounts will be and how it will work is something. So I think it is worth to actually highlight that, because that does go into the points that Declan made right at the start about how do we plan financially with so many imponderables.
Okay, a series of comments there. Anyone want to respond?
Rishi Sunak happens to be the Minister for the Better Care Fund, which is strange, but he is. And he was coming this week, and we were going to raise that particular point with him, but he's now not coming because of Brexit. So whenever he comes, we will raise it, because it is a risk to us. We've funded it ourselves for the time being, and we will have to make a decision. You either fund, if we don't get money in for it, we'll either have to stop doing it or cut something else if you want to do it, because there is limited money. But Rishi's the man. Apparently he understands it entirely, and he was coming to see us on, I think it was Thursday, wasn't it, Chief?
Yeah.
And now he's not coming.
David Bill.
Chairman, I wasn't going to raise this, but on that point, what we learnt at that committee is that the UHL hospitals are going to be reducing the number of outpatients by 300,000 a year. Now, if that happens, of course, it's going to throw more weight back into local treatment, local care, and so this does start to look at. We should signal up this as a concern, and I'm pleased that we're going to question this. Could I ask about the collections hub? We raised this at the meeting because we do know that the county council has a significant collection, and it's important that we maintain it properly. I'm not totally convinced that loaning them to schools, which is a good idea in itself in principle, has sufficient safeguards to ensure that the paintings are properly looked after and are returned. We all know the stories of what's happened to certain paintings, and I think it's a hidden story there about where some of them have gone, but and how some of them were damaged, and that's the stories there are well known. What we didn't know at that meeting was the fact that the county council is selling off paintings. We've had this Freedom of Information report which came to the local government information unit, and it talks about Hertfordshire is going to auction its paintings to raise cash, 400 paintings, but interestingly it also goes on to talk about Leicestershire, and it says that Leicestershire sold £197,000 of paintings over the last the 4 years up to 2017. Now, it would be useful to have a report on which paintings have been sold, what was the rationale behind that movement, and what future plans there are to dispose of paintings. I think I wouldn't have raised this today, but I think we could have been told this when we actually asked this question on last week. I think when members of the County Council actually ask questions, they should be given factual answers and not have these things just glossed over. We're here to seek out facts, and and I think we have the right to be given full answers when we put them.
Okay, I think there's a policy on this, Chris.
It's going back a few years, this is, but I'm fairly certain it was well publicised in terms of what we did at the time, both in terms of cabinet reports and probably scrutiny.
The policy, if I remember rightly, is if we sell artwork, that is it doesn't go into sort of the reserves or the general fund. It gets reinvested in improving and restoring other works of art that then can be used. I think that's right, is it, John?
Yeah, my recollection also is that advice was taken from some outside experts about the intrinsic value of the paintings, if you like. The decision to sell was based on that advice. There was no good case to retain them, either in storage or elsewhere.
I understood that exactly the same as the Chief said. The amount of stuff we've got is absolutely unbelievable, really. We've got sheds full of it at Barrow and places like that. Indeed, in the longer term, it does need sorting out and a proper facility, because the facility we've got at Wigston is really busy, but it's outdated, and some of the stuff we've got you can't get to see. I take Byron's point that the capital is a real problem, but ultimately we are the curators of stuff which we've inherited for hundreds of years, and it's just hidden away in sheds, and people will like to come and look at it. You know how interested people are in genealogy and that sort of stuff now. There's adverts on the TV all the time. So there is a genuine interest amongst people, and we should ideally be aspirational and be thinking about something that will last for a number of years that people can get to and use. And that just doesn't mean the likes of me and Byron. It's children coming from schools being able to access it, and it is unbelievable, the things we've got. I mean, in the past, I've bored people to death about our corset collection, which we have got, better than they've got at Harborough. We've got one of the world-leading shoe collections in storage. We've got stuff that nobody believes that people would love to come and see, but can't at the present. So I take Byron's point about the problem with the capital, but we do need to be aspirational at some time in the future and grasp the nettle and build something that's useful.
Agree. Terry?
I was only going to come back, Chairman, and put in context. I mean, we learned at the committee that we have over 1 million artefacts that we own as a council. And therefore, in the context of 1 million, I think 4 is insubstantial. And if we were to look at reports on every single item, we'd do nothing else but do that. And coming back, we've made no decisions about it. I was just giving some blue sky thoughts on what was discussed about getting to schools. But personally, I would rather take the risk of some items being damaged than them never being seen. So what is the point of items if they're never seen? It's a pointless exercise. Sometimes you have to take the risk. I think in the context of what the committee looked like, I think we're comfortable with the reports we're getting through in consensus of the majority, and we'll be having a further report coming through as is illustrated in the minutes.
Terry Arnhem?
Thank you, Chair. I think that whatever decision is finally made about the collections, I totally agree with Councillor Richardson. There is little point in having collections that we can't see that are merely stored away. Certainly in my division, the first question that people will say is, why is Councillor Rushton suddenly so interested in all of these lovely heritage artefacts, and why did he close Snibston?
Right, I'm not going to get Nick to answer that. Going back on the history. Right, let's move on finally to Children and Families Overview held on the 22nd of January. quite some useful information in here, particularly about the situation with the school's budget. Mr. Bill, I believe you've tabled a question you've got, which you'd like. I don't think we can get you an answer on this. It's quite detailed this morning.
As to the dedicated schools grant schools block, I've been looking into this, and it's to do really with the fact that sixth form schools which have sixth forms are not fully funded for the sixth form part of it. Perhaps if I read these questions out, and then I'll be happy with a written,
I think the best thing
written
is you
response.
do that, you hand them over, and you get a written answer, because from my understanding is they're quite detailed.
Yes, they are. They are concerned basically to do with the fact that funding for the 11 to 16-year-olds is assessed before funding for post-16 education is added. And there's just one further point on this, and that is a primary head told me some time ago that she spends half her time on social services matters rather than on teaching. And it seems to me that as we cut back on children's social services, it's going to put more pressure on the schools who have to pick up what's happening out there. So I think we have to sort of think about the knock-on effect of what we do. Schools may no longer be our responsibility legally, but I think we've got a moral obligation to ensure that schools concentrate on teaching rather than as well as looking after youngsters.
Okay, so you've handed these questions to Rosemary for a written answer from the relevant officers in Chris's team. Are there any other questions in relation to children and people? Okay, so that completes our look at the budget, the MTFS. This now goes on to the Cabinet next month, and then the County Council meeting around the 22nd. There are no items of urgent business. I will just remind you that the next meeting of this committee is at 10:30 on the 6th of March. Can I thank... Oh, Nick's gone. Can I thank Nick and Byron, particularly for staying all morning, and to Johnson and the other officers. Thank you very much. I'll close the meeting.